honored to be doing this lecture. Okay, the title of this lecture is Archaic Modernity. Why this title? When we created our office 15 years ago with Yves Moreau, my partner, I think we thought of ourselves as modern designers in a quite different ways, each of us. And it was probably because it was a moment in social sciences when there was this idea that a new modernity was possible, that you could resurrect the old modernity as it was like an old rusty machine. So we thought, okay, if it's possible in social sciences, could it be also in architecture? So it was a moment where everybody was inventing, proposing new prefixes like hyper-modern or retro-modern and supra-modern and, you know, all kinds of prefixes. Everybody was inventing a new one. And we thought, okay, let's imagine our own one, because actually none of the proposal did really fit. We didn't like them so much because they all seemed to represent a sort of tamed or not so interesting version of the first modernity. They were all like second modernities, but not as fun and heroic as the first one. So we thought maybe there's another kind of modernity that did exist in history. This is one modernity that we call the archaic modernity, and that did exist in moments of crisis. And we had in mind, for instance, the Viennese secession, you know, during the Nazi era. And, you know, the architecture was much darker somehow, and was more looking at itself, and it was sort of a self-centered modernity compared to the Western modernity, and it wasn't aiming for the future because there was no future, but still it was trying to imagine something else. So it was something for an elsewhere that was inside of itself, not really in the past, but somewhere else. And if you think of, you know, Gustav Klimt paintings, you know, he's very much about the pregnancy, you know. This was a very dark modernity focused on its own origins. There are other examples. We're thinking of the post-war Italy also. You know, Italy had lost the war, and there was the filmmakers couldn't go to their studios, and they started filming in the streets with non-professional actors, and neo-realist cinema was born out of this problem of the scarcity of means. And this was, for us, this was totally modern, even though it was not based on technological progress. So, of course, when we say archaic modernity, it's almost like a contradiction, like an oxymoron, because modern means usually means ahead of its time, and archaic means old. But if you look, sorry, it's in French, but if you look at the definition of archaic, it doesn't mean old. In reality, it means like it's the beginning. It's where everything starts. So if you think of this archaic modernity, then it's not like an old thing. It's not a modernity from the past, but it's something that is anachronical, or anachronic. Sorry, it doesn't something that is not fit its own moment. It's not its own epoch. So maybe. I may say that maybe it's a little bit abstract as an idea. So I thought I could show you a few images to show you more clearly what I have in mind. These are pictures that are taken by photographer Toshio Shibata, the Japanese photographer, and these are structures along Japanese roads. And we always loved the structures and the photographs themselves, and we thought this could be something we will try to reach one day. It could be an architecture we would like to do because it's so both rough and refined. There's something beautiful about that. You know, there's really no design involved, in design in terms of someone who wants to make it look like it should be looking like, you know, like no aesthetic project. But at the same time, you know, it's so, look at the details. The technical details are incredibly beautiful. And there's another thing that we found very exciting and questioning in these structures is you don't really know if they are growing, if they are like the grids of modern city growing onto the mountain, and if they tend to cover the mountain, or if these grids are in a state of destruction. You know, maybe here the water is rising and maybe the grass is growing and maybe they are disappearing. So they are really in a strange state between construction and destruction. And they're in between, and you know, it's like teenagehood, adolescence, somehow, you know, when kids are in between two different moments in their life and they don't know if they want to retreat, to go back in their childhood, or if they want to go back, to jump into adulthood. And they are really in between these feelings of destruction, suicide, and construction of becoming someone else. We're here talking about teenagehood, adolescence, moments of crisis, being in between two ages and not knowing what to do, you know, growing or progressing or regressing, you know. And so I think that may have been our stage, our own kind of feeling stage or wish of architecture. You have this structure between, you know, something, you see modernity growing, and you see these two opposite figures, which are the grid and the rune. So what I will try to show through the different projects I will show you is try to show how I think there are always been, it's a retroactive reflection we had on our work, how there are two figures like that sort of meet each other in our work, which is the modern grid and the romantic rune. So this is one of the very first little objects that we did. It's a technical gas station that's situated in the suburb of Paris. You have thousands and thousands of them. You don't even notice them because they look like concrete cubes covered with graffitis. And here we had the idea of building like a small little military tent that would not remain, but eventually remained, and grass and ivy would grow on it, and it would turn into a bush after several years. So it's almost like a Smithian idea of the runes in reverse. It's a building that grows into a state of runes. It doesn't fall into rune, it grows into rune. It has the rune, this state of the rune ahead of it. The other side, the grid, same moment, same quite similar aesthetic. We were asked by a client from the south of France to design data centers and, you know, small boxes for his projects that could fit anywhere, no context. So we thought we would refer to the Tron movie, which was part of our, you know, set of reference, and we propose to design this box using the same frame for the car parks as for the structure and the facade, and sort of fit everything into this absolutely generic figure. It was sort of a joke, but we thought we liked the idea of referring to Tron in particular because you know, the grid in the movie, I don't know if you remember, it's a movie from the very beginning of the 80s, and the grid is very important. The main character is named Flynn, and he says that the grid is the new frontier. And you know, in English, frontier means it's the limit between during the conquest of the West. It's the limit between the territory that has been already you know, it's occupied by the Americans and the territory of the Indians. So it's the limit between what is civilized and what is wild. And so it was sort of suggesting that, you know, have to imagine the beginning of the 80s that the computer world was sort of the Wild West at the time. So the movie was, I think, more interesting than it seemed if you really looked at if you would listen to it, you know, and even the main character was Jeff Bridges, and he was sort of talking about the Jefferson grid. So I don't know if it was made on purpose. So of course the client didn't like the project, so we used it for a different project situated in a business, mostly commercial business district, you know, this kind of zone of activity that you have everywhere, totally generic as well. So it was a very small sort of business incubator, very small, public building, and situated in between commercial sheds. So it's built like a shed, like a metal structure, except it's covered with black glass, a very Miss Van der Rohe's facade. So it was sort of a very tiny project, but sort of a private joke for architects, because it's a decorated shed, but decorated with a Missian facade, which is absolutely a contradiction in terms as well, because you see that the facade is actually not flat, it's just following the slope of the site. And the building is so well framed that even the trees sometimes look like they are part, they follow the grid of the building, of the project. This is the moment where we got our first main big commission for a building in Paris, and this is a housing project. So we pretty much used the same aesthetic. We were doing it at the same time, but adding another important device, which is this sunshade that you see on the facade. The project is actually made of 3 different programs. It's social housing, like normal social housing, very poor social housing for young people who live in the street, and also kindergarten. And these 3 programs really don't fit with each other. They don't want to relate to each other. And you can add that the residents next to it, which is a private residence, were actually very much opposed to the project. So a difficult association. So what we proposed it was to use that figure of the sunshade as a figure for intimacy and not just the sun protection. And also the building is situated on top of a hill, a beautiful place that few people know in Paris because there's no metro around. It's next to the cemetery of Père Lachaise, if for some who know, and it faces that water tank. Actually, it's an horizontal water tank. It's totally flat and totally abstract, very strange place. And we thought we would play on the abstractness of the facade. You know, in front of that horizontal plane, we would do the vertical one with as little variation as possible between the different social kind of housing, because we didn't want to mention who was the poorest of the two. only you can distinguish the different programs because the way the sunshades are used. So the apartments have a double orientation for most of them, and they draw that kind of scale effect on the facade. This is the back, and what we propose is to put the sunshades outside the balcony, the long balcony, so that where they are down, they sort of create another extra room. So people can use them as a way of forming a different interior space that is slightly as well outside, like a limit between them, their own home and their neighbors. Here you see the bathrooms that are situated on the north, that have the beautiful view, and we thought it would be nice that you can, be naked at home and looking so far away in the East Parisian landscape. So in the end, on the southeast side of the building, when you have these balconies and also the presence of the neighbors, the sunshades act like it's a device of definition, like an active device of definition of bringing a relation between domesticity and publicness. People can use the balcony as rooms, but they can also what's inside their home at the same time. We're shifting into a totally new set of references in a moment where we're starting working on public facilities. It happened mostly when we won a competition for Laval. It's a medium-sized city in France, and they had this incredible idea to make a program for an infrastructure for small companies working in the field of 3D simulation. And they had this idea that they would bring an auditorium, facilities, restaurants, specifically for this, to help these companies. Very super interesting, intelligent program. And it was called City of Virtual Reality. It was situated in a former military land next to a shopping mall, roundabout, that kind of landscape. And but there was one thing that was mentioned in the file that we were given in the brief, is that they wanted to build also a new stadium, 3,000 seats stadium just north of the building. And we thought, okay, this is our first international competition. We've already lost it, so we have nothing to lose. So we thought, okay, if you put the two projects together, then it's better. The bigger, the better, because there's a yearly festival for 3D simulation, and all the geeks of the world gather in Laval. Nobody knows Laval, but suddenly the whole world of the geek culture comes to that place. And you can do the festival in the stadium, and while the stadium will be alive, the city will be sleeping, and the two programs will make a city, a 24-hour city altogether. So the basic idea was to draw a circle of 100 meter in diameter, and situate the initial program on one half of the site and the stadium on the other side. So it was sort of a, pizza, you can put whatever. You have that original shape, and you put all kinds of activities. And it's really like forming a city, a wall, which define what is intramuros and extramuros. So the idea is to give value to what's inside. And the mayor liked the idea because he didn't have any money for the stadium, but he thought, yes, we will bring new companies, and we'll say, we will give you a place inside the circle, and this will be a device, a means to attract companies to our city. So this was a way to compare the historical center of Laval and the actual size, and the reference was very much about science fiction. And the Death Star, or this sculpture by Antelio, which is made of I forgot the word, you know, that the climatiseur that don't work anymore. Look, it looks like technological, but it's just waste. So this is the building in the end. The idea is that, following the idea that it's a small city, we define the different the corridors are 4 meters wide. They're like streets, so you only need 1.5 meter to walk through, and the rest is space that can be appropriated by the users. So the idea is that most of the spaces inside are treated as linear spaces that you can walk through, meaning every space is like a street that you can take and cross so you can cross the building, go across. This is the restaurant, the entrance, one corridor, or a 4 meter wide corridor. And we were also, when we were doing the project, the standard project, the housing project, we were also working on, we're not the main architect, we're working on a school with a architect friend of us, Jean de Giacinto from Bordeaux. The project is actually situated near Paris, in the outskirts, so we were sort of the local architects. And that was actually our first experience of, you know, sort of large construction sites. And we thought that the construction moment was very exciting. The building, we thought, looked really good when it was under construction. The companies had put a lot of effort in making a good concrete, and we thought that this moment, that you know, 2 years lifetime of a building when it's under construction was an important moment. You know, it refers to, this is its own origins, but if you think of your 2 first years, they are pretty important, and that maybe we should find a way to keep them alive, to keep them visible while the project is finished, and not try to finish the building too much and not hide what the first signs, the signs of its birth. So I won't go too far into the explanation of that school. You see that these are 2 schools situated on a former industrial land. The soil was so polluted that it had to be taken away, and we proposed to replace that soil, that polluted soil, by the building itself. And the building is organized around 2 schools that overlap each other in the center, and that create that kind of structure, that bridge structure, where you see the 2 schools that all have their own ground floor. And we've situated all of the collective and common spaces, pedagogic garden on the roof, shared spaces in the middle, and an extra space on the ground that wasn't part of the project and that we called the cave. And we thought, yeah, kids love the caves, so they love that the space, dark spaces that nobody wants to do anything with. So we tried to work with quite mythical figures. You know, we used the labyrinth on the floor, which is a real labyrinth. You know, if you can, there's an entrance and there's an exit, so you can really, if the kids are serious, you know, they can really find a way. And we used that figure of the pyramids, and this raw aesthetic inside the building. So from that experience, we thought that there was something to keep from this aesthetic of the infrastructure, the roughness, because first, you know, see the slab, this highway bridges, they have this strength, that the force that of their own weight. You know, I mean, you can see that they're heavy, and also they are very unfinished. And we like the idea that they wouldn't say, "Here we are, the project is done, and it's done forever, and it won't move anymore." So we like this idea that a building could leave a little opening about its own possible evolution in time. So this is the idea that we try to develop mostly in this academic university building in Saclay. Here, the idea was to try to situate ourselves in between the realm of architecture and infrastructure. Not really resist, not just do a well-finished building. It's hard to do because we have we have intellectual barriers, and it's not easy to explain to your clients that you don't want to finish the project. So it's not that easy. But this was the idea, and it was very much related to the context. Saclay is a campus. It's a very big state, huge state project. It's almost like a new town. It's created in fields of corn. You have a few existing projects from the 70s and the 90s. But we were almost like the first university project coming. So it was like the idea of, for us, that's how we were very serious about that. We thought, okay, well, it's almost the first building of the new campus. It's the origin of the campus. So let's try to make a building that will help imagine the rest of the city, even though you have no public space. So we won't start with public space. We'll start with a building, a very symbolic building. So you see on the plan that the whole site was under construction. You see on the left, OMA, École Centrale of Engineers, which is about 20 times bigger than ours, which is the smallest building on the campus. And we're pretty impressed that OMA would be just next us, because we thought, hey, anytime they'll take pictures of their big building, will be at the back, will be on all the pictures and the publications. So the idea of the building is to superimpose all the different activities. It really contains mainly cafeteria, indoor sport activities, 2 basketball courts on the roof, and a large collective restaurant open to the students, the researchers, the teachers, and the employees of the site. Since there was no public space around yet, only 2 roads, we thought we would create a plaza on the south, on the other side, and every floor would be like a public plaza. What was at stake is the possibility to reach the public plaza on the ground floor and the roof of the building, to make that access open 24 hours a day. So the idea was to create a staircase inside the building, but a staircase that would remain outside, you know, like in a Klein bottle. It's inside, but it really rains inside it. And we defended the idea that this staircase would be like a vertical street. Anybody could take it anytime. There would be no entrance hall. All activity would be reachable independently from that stair, and you wouldn't have a main door. And there are actually 6, 7 entrances into the building. So the main feature of the building is that structure that you can feel from the inside as well as the outside. It is sort of the frame that allows to organize, for instance, this circulation that are all situated outside. It's a rather thick, deep building, deep plan, but all circulation are around, and they are lit naturally. And you have moments where you really are in a strange situation with, on the left you are outside on the plaza, and on the right you're outside, with the staircase. So you really have strange moments where you're just walking on a bridge. And as a way, since the project was also had a very small budget, public budget under crisis, so big program and no means, no possibility to build it, or we told our client, maybe okay, let's not build everything, but maybe we can make some rooms bigger, so we can do different things in the same place. Programists usually have troubles imagining that you can do two things in the same place. Say, let's make a big restaurant, a nice cafeteria, and some spaces, maybe we can leave them open in their use. Maybe that first floor, don't attribute any program there. It will just be a place. It will be on the way to the roof, and people will stop here and they will wait for their friends before going into the restaurant. And maybe we have to keep some places that have no fundamental question, no precise vocation, just like public space. You're not saying everybody, you're not telling everybody what they or he or she should do on a public space. It's open to use. So from there, we evolved this idea of a specific kind of rune. I was telling you about that figure of the rune, and this rune we call it the joyful rune. It's not the rune that is destroying itself, but it's a rune that is in a state of becoming. Because if you think of buildings under construction and buildings in a state of demolition, they pretty much look the same. You don't know. And for instance, we were thinking of this example of pictures taken in south of Italy and Sicilia. The photograph is Amélie Labourdette. You can see that these ruins have something special. These buildings are not in a state of destruction, but their construction has stopped. And this is different. They are still in a state of progress, but progress has stopped simply. And I think they're not so sad. You don't see the signs of decay. You imagine that they may start again someday. Probably they won't, but the idea remains that the potential is there. And I think you can feel that potential on the pitches. And we thought that maybe some buildings have that quality of being ruins in a state of, I would say, of adolescence. This is, for instance, Le Corbusier Tower of Shadows in Chandigarh. We think it's hard to say the age of the building and what it's meant for. It's from 1950. And you have that sky building by Yoji Watanabe also. It's a metabolist building, and we always loved that building. And it was almost destroyed some years ago. It's a metabolist building, and like all metabolist building, it's like a tree, there's a trunk and you got leaves around, and the building is supposed to grow. And of course, none of the metabolist building ever grew, and that's probably better like this. And because they kept that potential of growing some, maybe in our own imagination. So that building was almost destroyed. It was abandoned, and they repainted it with this beautiful little colors years ago, and gave it a new life. So it was like a bit. This building is a bit like the phoenix, It's a new. It found a new life, and it was saved from destruction. And I think this is very much almost the same story probably for this tower that you probably know is the Torre David, the tower in Caracas. You know, this tower is famous because David was actually the name of the investor who died during construction, and there was a financial crisis. And the tower, the construction of the tower was stopped, and it was appropriated by hundreds of families and that started living and inside, like, and turning this tower into a vertical squat. So the story has become famous because this tower suddenly turned into something totally different. It had a first life. It was supposed to be an office building, and one day it turned to be a vertical squat, a housing tower. And of course, that second life is way more interesting than the first life, you know. Otherwise, it would have been like a normal office tower. So we sort of try to use a little bit this idea of vertical squat, of a building that where everybody can do, you know, appropriate each stair independently. This was for a private client in Paris, in south of Paris, and this was a client called Kaufman and Broad, who does individual housing. He does. This is a client that does catalogs of with different types of housing, and they came to us once and said, "Okay, we're not so good at collective housing. We're pretty good with houses. We have a huge catalogs. People can choose whatever style they want, but for collective housing, it's more difficult. We're not so good. We don't have an image. Can you help us for that?" And so what we propose is to make 3 little towers linked to each other with large collective spaces, terraces in between, and so that we try to reach that kind of suburban condition, you know, where you really have a lot of public space that you can use or not use, and each level, each story of each tower can be a different office or home. So we try to redefine this other way to organize collectiveness. This is an idea of the multitude. We made reference to James Wine, High Rise of Homes, you know, by defining a collective structure where everybody could live quite independently. We also created our own catalog of facades, and we thought that the users, the new residents, would just choose their facade on the catalog. This is the last project I will present tonight. This is it relates somehow to it's a sort of cousin of Saclay, because it's really the first building in the new this new district of Montpellier, and you will see that somehow it borrows kind of an idea from the Laval city of virtual reality. So we're in a district very close to the new high-speed train line outside Montpellier, and the plan is to build an entire district around the station. So this is the first building, and so we used the idea was to use an open grid, which is the initial grid of a city, which is a 12 by 12 grid, and consider that this grid is the most efficient, perfect grid for office building. And what we proposed, in reference to our Kizum no-stop city, we proposed to just apply this grid on the floor to make a vertical or an horizontal building, and define this like chessboard-like plan with that alternates technical cores, working plateau by 12 by 12, so they can be naturally lit on the 2 sides, and patio in between, because we are in the south of France with strong sun conditions. So the idea was to create like an urban fabric that's simply an interior landscape that's simply limited by the limits of the actual site. It's not a circle, but simply the actual limits of the site. So this is the initial module that is multiplied so as to create that ideal city plan fitted into the site on 3 different levels, and so to provide the space for the new young companies working in new technologies. Okay, so this I'll make a conclusion. I don't know if how clear I've been. I tried to show to focus mainly on 2 figures, which was the grid, the infinite grid, the modern grid, and also on the rune, the romantic rune, and 2 figures that are very opposite to each other, and I try to make a new narrative just for you, to entertain you. Try to create a narrative that would be in between those 2 figures, and try to illustrate this idea of an archaic modernity. The grid says something about conquest. It says something about development, the control of people, population, territories, and the rune says something about totally different, says something about loneliness, regrets, and destruction. So we thought we may try to imagine a discourse or a narrative in between these 2. Why? Because I think maybe today we are probably in between those 2 discourses. We are modern. In Europe, we've always known that moment of development. In France, since there was the revolution and all the Enlightenment, pretty touched by these ideals of modernity, even though they're somehow behind us. But still, we live in modern cities with infrastructures, high-rise buildings, and so we live with modernity has become like a tradition for us. But on the other side, today, we have that idea of that strong narrative about the crisis, the end of the world, the apocalypse, both economical and ecological crisis. We're also in a moment where, somehow refers to post-war Italy or Japan, as or pre-war Austria, I was mentioning at the beginning of the conference. So I think we're in between 2 states, 2 feelings, 2 desires of, one side regression and on one side regression and on the other side progression. So we're in between, and we thought that it is possible to combine them. We only need to think that a crisis is only a moment of change. It's never the end of anything. Sometimes it's also the beginning of a new era. And also that if you look back at history, you see that moments of crisis have been the most exciting moments of artistic and intellectual creation. Thank you for your attention.